welcome back. Now, every year on the 1st of March, the world commemorates African School Feeding Day to reflect on the importance of school meals for the health, education and wealth of communities. According to a recent UNESCO report, Born to Learn, too many African children are still not learning because they are hungry in class. To help with coverage, UNESCO has created a fact sheet highlighting nutrition data from Born to Learn, a spotlight report from UNESCO's Global Education Monitoring Report focusing on Africa. And we're now joined by Manos, Antoninis, Director of the Global Education Monitoring Report. And thank you so much for your time, Manos, and good afternoon to you. I mean, I think I want to start here where the importance and significance of commemorating such a day. How important is it in your view?
Oh, well, I think if one tries to understand whether and how children go to school, finish school and learn, one can look no further than school feeding. As you mentioned, it is incredible to think that today in large parts of Africa, there might be as many as 4 out of 10 children who claim that they are often or always hungry when they are in school. We know very well from science that hungry children means children whose brains do not develop to their full potential and therefore miss also the potential of benefit from their education.
I think of it during COVID-19, the height of the pandemic, Manos, you would agree with me that definitely children who dependent on those meals, who said those were the only meals they got in a day, and now that they were stuck at home, couldn't go to school and, benefit from these school feeding schemes were suffering. And I just wonder, in Africa, how many of such stories were there? How many of the numbers of children were affected during that particular time because they could not go to school and benefit from school feeding schemes?
It's a very good point you're making, because COVID-19 had so many consequences on our lives. But one of the most striking and perhaps unexpected consequences was to draw attention to the school as a basis, as a place, as a location where children benefit from so many other services than just education, and health services in particular, and school feeding, which is, of course, a major opportunity for poor children to make up for meals that they may be losing at home. In Africa, 1 in 3 primary school students benefit from a school meal. That means not enough, but it is a tendency that keeps growing. The big question is whether governments will stand behind these programs or whether these programs will continue being funded externally.
Are we seeing more of a better understanding from different ministries, different governments in the African continent to adopt, feeding schemes in schools? Is there a resistance or perhaps a negligence in understanding the need in allocating budgets and resources? Because when children are hungry, there's absolutely no way they can concentrate and learn and benefit from education in classrooms.
I would not say it is a lack of understanding. Governments do understand, but they are really constrained by the resources they have available. Today, the good news is that almost 40% of school feeding programs are funded by governments, and that's a good indicator of some degree of progress. But the poorest countries sometimes fall way below that. The Spotlight report on foundational learning in Africa showed, for instance, in Madagascar, a country that recently suffered from drought and from famine conditions in parts of the country, only 1 in 10 children benefit from a school feeding program. Now, what some governments are doing is to bring in the communities, and that is, of course, not the best solution, is the second best, but it has some other benefits. The involvement of the community in feeding, in school nutrition, can be very important because it is also more likely to mobilize resources, local resources, and to lead to better quality feeding, which is based on local food stuff and also helps generate a little bit the local economy.
Yeah, so there are definitely some lessons we can learn there, Manos, from the likes of Rwanda, where you made that example about community support being quite evident there, Madagascar implementing that homegrown and locally purchased school feeding program. And I want to touch on that correlation between such positive stories and how children then do well, I suppose, both academically and even socially.
Yes, there is a definite evidence from many parts of the world that the countries that have actually achieved the biggest progress in learning outcomes in Latin America or in Asia really have been the countries that at the same time managed to bring malnutrition rates down. So that's a very important lesson. School feeding can help, but of course we need general improvement in economic conditions to make that happen. But it is important for governments to show a commitment. You mentioned the example of Rwanda, which has undertaken to universalize school meals and to take on 40% of the total cost, which is a very positive sign. Kenya has been a very good example of a country that actually now is wholly responsible for the financing of school feeding programs in the country. And that is the way that most countries should be moving towards.
Mm. And maybe let's take it back to the reasons why children are hungry. And I suppose it's not only because there aren't any feeding schemes in their schools. It could be because their parents are not working, there's a high unemployment rate. Take me through some of the common reasons in the African region why children do go hungry, not only in schools, but also in their homes.
Yes, unfortunately, Africa remains the region of the world that has seen the slowest progress in improving nutrition rates. Still, far too many children, almost 4 in 10, are stunted. That means that they are very short for their age. Inevitably, we need robust economic growth rates. There is, of course, a good movement in that direction, but then that also needs to be translated into government raising more resources and then being able to redistribute them to those parts of their countries that are most in need. And still, unfortunately, many of the regions of countries that are most affected by malnutrition are hard to reach, and therefore they're probably the ones that are standing last to benefit from any such policies.
Manos, in your view, is UNESCO's call for zero hunger in schools attainable? And if so, how long do you think we'll get there?
Of course, zero hunger is a global goal, is a goal that countries set for 2030. And the signs are that, unfortunately, we may not be moving in that direction as fast as we would have liked. And for some countries also, the recent turmoils in economies and societies caused by COVID, caused, of course, by war and conflict, mean that there are growing concerns about debt and the ability of governments to direct the resources, the actually rather limited resources they have, to those policies that will help achieve humanitarian goals, like the obvious one of making sure that no child, no person remains hungry. So there really needs to be very careful thinking, especially as debt discussions are ongoing and how debt relief can be provided, because we cannot really afford to leave any child compromising their potential.
And on that note, we leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking to me. UNESCO's Manos, Antoninis, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.